Lanterns cast a warm, golden glow across the garden, dappling the faces of our friends and family with shifting patterns of honey and shadow. It was perfect, exactly as I had envisioned it. Every detail, from the placement of the jasmine centerpieces to the curated playlist of soft indie folk, had been orchestrated with a loving, almost obsessive precision. This night was a reflection of me, of us, of the life Liam and I were about to build. Together, a life of quiet elegance, of thoughtful details, of peace. Liam's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "You did all this," he whispered, his voice a low hum of awe. "It's incredible, Chloe. You're incredible." I squeezed his hand, a surge of pure, unadulterated happiness swelling in my chest. For the first time, I felt like the protagonist of my own story. Not the supporting character, not the prologue, not the cautionary tale. The main event, my engagement party. For 28 years, I had lived in the brilliant, often blinding spotlight of my older sister, Isabella. Bella, the vibrant, the dramatic, the one who sucked all the oxygen out of a room and somehow made you grateful for the breathlessness. She was the sun, and I was a small, quiet planet in her orbit, content to reflect her light and never dare to generate my own. But tonight was different. Tonight, the universe had tilted on its axis, my universe at least. I saw her across the lawn, holding court near the champagne fountain. Even with a simple silk dress, she was incandescent. Her husband, Mark, stood beside her, looking solid and dependable, as always. He caught my eye and raised his glass in a silent toast, a genuine smile on his face. Mark was a good man, stable, successful, and completely, utterly devoted. To my sister, I smiled back, a real, unforced smile. For a fleeting moment, I felt a sense of sisterly pride. She had a good life, a great husband. She had everything. And tonight, so did I. My parents were mingling. My mother fluttering from group to group with a champagne flute permanently attached to her hand, boasting about Liam's job as an architect. My father, a man of fewer words, simply looked proud of me. This was a novelty that felt as intoxicating as the Prosecco bubbling in my glass. Everything was aligned. Every star in my personal sky was twinkling just for me. The air was thick with the scent of night blooming, flowers, and the gentle murmur of happy conversations. I took a deep breath, wanting to bottle this feeling, to save it for a day when the sky might not be so clear. Liam kissed my temple. Happy? I turned to him, my heart feeling too big for my body. "More than happy," I said. "This is everything." And that, of course, was her cue. It started with the gentle ting, ting, ting of a knife against a champagne flute. The sound, delicate at first, cut through the ambient chatter, drawing eyes and stilling conversations. It was Bella, of course. She stood on the small slate step leading down from the patio, a beatific smile plastered on her face. Mark looked momentarily confused, as if this wasn't on the evening's agenda. It wasn't. The only speeches planned were a short welcome from Liam and me, and a toast from my father. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she called out, her voice resonating with a practiced, theatrical clarity. The remaining conversations died down. Every single eye in that garden, the garden I had decorated, the garden filled with people we had invited, turned to her. My stomach gave a familiar sickening lurch. Liam's hand tightened on mine, a silent question. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I had no idea. "First," Bella began, beaming, "I want to say how absolutely beautiful everything is tonight. A huge congratulations to my brilliant little sister, Chloe, and my wonderful future brother-in-law, Liam." She paused, letting the polite applause wash over her. She lifted her glass. "Your love is an inspiration, and we are also so happy for you." It was the perfect, unimpeachable sentiment, the kind of thing that makes you feel petty for the poison suddenly curdling in your gut. She took a breath, placing her free hand over her stomach. It was a gesture I'd seen in movies, a subtle, almost subconscious movement, but on Bella, nothing was ever subconscious. Everything was a performance. Tonight is about new beginnings, she continued, her voice dropping into a softer, more emotional register. And as we celebrate the incredible new beginning for Chloe and Liam, Mark and I have been blessed with a little new beginning of our own. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a sound of pure delight. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father's jaw went slack with surprise. Bella's eyes found mine, and in them I saw it. A glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. She knew exactly what she was doing. We're pregnant. She squealed, and the garden erupted. Cheers, whoops, and a tidal wave of congratulations rolled towards her, lifting her up, placing her right back where she was most comfortable, the absolute center of the universe. My moment, so carefully constructed, so desperately wanted, evaporated in the space of a single heartbeat. It dissolved into the background, becoming the pre-show for the main event. Her event. Liam was frozen beside me, a plastic smile on his face. People were rushing past us, past me, the bride-to-be, to swarm my sister, to hug Mark, to touch Bella's still flat stomach. I was a statue, a decorative prop, at my own party. And as I watched her accept the adoration, watched my own parents hug her with a fervor they hadn't shown me all night, something inside me didn't just break. It atomized. It turned into white-hot, razor-sharp dust. The years of swallowed insults, of minimized achievements, of being the sensible, reliable, boring sister while she danced through life, leaving chaos in her wake, it all coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure behind my eyes. My mind flashed, unbidden, to 2 weeks ago. Bella had borrowed Mark's sedan because her convertible was in the shop. I'd ridden with her to a nursery to pick out flowers for tonight. While she was inside, I'd waited in the passenger seat, my purse slipping to the floor. As I reached down, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper stuffed deep under the seat. A receipt. From a hotel. A boutique. Hideously expensive place downtown called the Gilded Cage. It was a charge for a room and room service for two. Dated on a Tuesday night when Mark was supposedly on a business trip to Chicago. I hadn't thought much of it. Then, maybe he'd come back early and surprised her. But there was something else tucked into the fold of the receipt. A single earring. A small, distinctive gold hoop with a tiny serpent design. It wasn't Bella's style, and it certainly wasn't mine. But I recognized it. I'd helped Daniel, Liam's best man and one of Mark's oldest friends, pick it out for his on-again, off-again girlfriend months ago. The memory, the receipt, the earring it slammed into my present consciousness with the force of a physical blow. The pieces, which had been floating aimlessly in the back of my mind, clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The late nights she'd claimed were girls' nights. The sudden, secretive phone calls. The way Daniel had been avoiding my gaze all evening. My blood went from boiling to ice cold in an instant. The noise of the party faded into a distant roar. The golden light seemed to curdle. My carefully constructed world of peace and elegance was a sham, built on a foundation of lies. Her lies. I didn't plan it. I didn't think it through. The rage was a wild animal that had been caged for 2 decades, and my sister had just handed it the key. I took a single step forward, then another. The crowd parted for me, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Liam whispered my name, a warning. Chloe, don't. But I couldn't stop. I reached the step where Bella was still glowing, her hand on her belly. She looked at me, her smile faltering slightly at the expression on my face. Chloe, is everything okay? Her voice was laced with that fake saccharine concern she was so good at. My voice, when it came out, was terrifyingly calm. It didn't shake. It didn't waver. It was as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass. A new beginning, I repeated, the words tasting like acid. It's certainly that. I let my eyes drift from her face past Mark's proud, oblivious expression and landed on Daniel, who was standing near the back, looking pale. His eyes were wide with panic. He knew what was coming. I looked back at my sister. I just have one question, Bella. My voice was louder now, carrying across the silent, watching garden. Are you going to tell Mark the baby is his? Or are you going to tell him the truth? The silence that followed was not like the one before. This was a vacuum, a heavy, absolute void that sucked the air from everyone's lungs. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a deep, bewildered frown. Chloe, what the hell are you talking about? I ignored him. My focus was entirely on Bella, whose face had gone from radiant to ashen in a second. The mask of the beatific mother-to-be had shattered, and behind it was raw, ugly fear. Because, I continued, the final unforgivable. Words spilling out, it must be difficult to know for sure, seeing as you've been sleeping with my fiance's best man for the last 6 months. I held her terrified gaze. Isn't that right, Daniel? The immediate aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a deafening implosion. The air itself seemed to collapse, crushing the joy and replacing it with a thick, unbreathable atmosphere of shock and horror. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if I had uttered a dark incantation, freezing everyone in a tableau of disbelief. My words hung in the air, glittering and venomous. Mark was the first to break the spell. He took a half step toward me, his face a mask of utter confusion. Chloe, that's not funny. What kind of a sick joke is this? His voice was tight, but it was still searching for a rational explanation, for a punchline that would make it all make sense. He looked at Bella, expecting her to laugh it off, to scold me for my terrible tastes in humor. But Bella was a statue carved from ice. Her face was utterly, completely white. Her eyes were locked on mine, wide with a terror so profound it was almost animalistic. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. In that moment, her silence was the most damning confession of all. Then all eyes swiveled, as if pulled by a string, to Daniel. He looked like he was about to be physically ill. His face, normally tanned and confident, was a blotchy, sickly gray. He was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Liam, who had been frozen beside me, finally moved. He took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. Daniel, what is she talking about? Daniel flinched as if struck. He shook his head, a pathetic, jerky motion. She's crazy, man, he mumbled, the words weak and unconvincing. I don't know what she's talking about. She's making it up. And that's when the dam broke. Making it up. My mother shrieked, her voice cracking with fury as she rushed to Bella's side. She rounded on me, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen directed at me before. How? Could you? How could you be so vile, Chloe? To say something so monstrous on a night like this? Bella finally found her voice. It came out as a wounded sob. She sagged against my mother, a perfect portrait of a wronged woman. I don't know, she cried, her voice muffled against our mother's shoulder. She's always been jealous. Always, but this is sick. Jealous. The word was a branding iron. It was the simple, easy explanation for everything. The one they had used my entire life to dismiss my feelings, my frustrations, my very identity. Chloe's just jealous of Bella. It was the family mantra, and now it was my indictment. I am not jealous, I shot back, my voice finally shaking. The calm had been breached, and a flood of frantic energy took its place. I saw the receipt, the earring, in Mark's car after. You borrowed it. Mark's head snapped toward Bella. What receipt? What earring? Bella pulled away from our mother, her face a mess of performative tears. He's twisting everything, she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. She's twisting everything. I borrowed the car, yes. I must have dropped an old receipt. And an earring? I lose earrings all the time. She's taking innocent things and building this fantasy because she couldn't stand that I had a moment of happiness at her party. It was brilliant, a masterclass in manipulation. She was turning my evidence into proof of my own insanity, my own petty vindictiveness. The guests were starting to murmur, shifting uncomfortably. They were siding with her. Of course they were. They were looking at me with pity and disgust. The crazy, jealous little sister finally having a complete public breakdown. My father stepped forward, his face dark with disappointment. "Chloe, that's enough," he said, his voice a low command. "You will apologize to your sister." "Now, apologize?" I asked, my voice rising to a near scream. "Apologize for telling the truth?" I looked desperately at Liam, pleading with my eyes for him to believe me, to stand by me. He just stood there, his expression shattered. He wasn't looking at me with anger, but with a deep, bottomless well of hurt and confusion. He was looking at his best friend, and at the woman who was supposed to become his sister, and at me, his future wife, and his entire world had just been detonated. He didn't know what to believe. And that, more than my mother's rage or my father's command, was what broke my heart. Get out," my father said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an excommunication. "Get out of this house, ... I started, my voice breaking. "Now, Chloe," he repeated, turning his back on me to comfort Bella, who was now sobbing hysterically in Mark's arms. Mark, poor Mark, just looked shell-shocked, rubbing her back, his eyes darting between her, me, and Daniel, a man drowning in an ocean of doubt. The beautiful garden, my garden, suddenly felt alien and hostile. The golden lanterns mocked me. The scent of jasmine was cloying, suffocating. I looked around at the faces of our friends, our family, and saw only condemnation. I had detonated a bomb, and I was the only one being hit by the shrapnel. With the last shred of my dignity, I turned around. I walked past Liam, my shoulder brushing his, but I couldn't bring myself to look at his face. I walked through the house I had grown up in, each step an echo in the sudden, vast emptiness of my life. I walked out the front door and into the cool, indifferent night, the sound of my sister's manufactured sobs following me all the way down the street. I didn't have my purse. I didn't have my keys. I just had the clothes on my back and the terrible, ringing truth in my head. The walk to the small apartment Liam and I shared was a blur. The suburban streets, usually so comforting in their quiet familiarity, felt menacing tonight. Every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like a whispered accusation. Jealous, vile, crazy. The words echoed in the empty space where my happiness had been just an hour before. I arrived at our front door and realized I didn't have my keys. Of course. They were in my clutch, sitting on a table in the garden. That now felt like a world away. I sank down onto the top step of the porch, wrapping my arms around my knees. The silk of my dress was thin against the chill of the night air. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in a state of shock so profound that my body had shut down all non-essential functions, including the production of tears. There was only a hollow, vibrating numbness. I had done it. I had actually done it. I had pulled the pin on a grenade and thrown it into the center of my own life. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes. An hour. Time had lost its meaning. Eventually, headlights swept across the lawn, and Liam's car pulled into the driveway. He killed the engine but didn't get out right away. He just sat there in the dark, the dashboard lights illuminating his silhouette. I watched him, my heart a painful, heavy stone in my chest. What was he thinking? Was he composing a speech? A breakup speech? Was he trying to figure out how to tell the woman he was supposed to marry that he could never look at her the same way again? Finally, his door opened and he walked slowly toward me. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. He sat down on the step beside me, not too close, leaving a careful, deliberate space between us. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the distant hum of the highway. "My mother drove your parents home," he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Mark took Bella. Daniel just disappeared." He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "The caterers are clearing everything up." He was reciting facts. Mundane details. Anything to avoid looking at the gaping crater I had created. "Liam," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I'm not lying." He turned his head to look at me then, and his eyes were filled with so much pain that I almost couldn't bear it. "Don't, Chloe," he said, his voice cracking. "Just not right now. Please. But I need you to know." I insisted, a desperate edge creeping into my tone. "I need you to believe me." "Believe what?" he asked, and now there was an edge to his voice, a sliver of the anger he must have been feeling. "Believe that my best friend, a man I've known since we were 5 years old, is sleeping with your sister? Believe that your sister, who is pregnant, is lying to her husband? Believe that you would choose to announce this thing in front of 100 people at our engagement party? Which part am I supposed to believe first, Chloe? Because honestly, it all sounds completely insane." His words were a physical blow. He was lumping my truth in with the horror of the act itself. He wasn't seeing the cause. He was just seeing the effect. The ugly, messy, public effect. "I didn't plan it," I said, my voice small. "It just came out." She stood there, taking my night away from me like she always does, announcing her pregnancy just to make it all about her again, and I just snapped. "Snapped?" he repeated, disbelief coloring the word. "You destroyed 4 lives in 30 seconds, Chloe. That's more than a snap. That's a detonation. Mark's life is ruined. Bella's, Daniel's, ours." He said the last word so quietly, it was almost a whisper. It was the word that mattered, ours. I finally felt the sting of tears. "It's not ruined if it's based on the truth," I argued, my voice thick. "Their marriage is the lie. Daniel's friendship is the lie. All I did was say what was real." "And you couldn't have said it to me, privately?" he asked, his voice rising. "You couldn't have pulled me aside and told me what you suspected? We could have figured it out together, but you didn't want that, did you? You wanted revenge. You wanted to hurt her for stealing your spotlight, and you didn't care who got caught in the crossfire." His accusation hung in the air between us, ugly, and I had to admit, not entirely untrue. Was it just about the truth? Or was it about the years of resentment? Was it about justice, or was it about payback? In the heat of the moment, had I even known the difference? "That's not fair," I said weakly. "Fair?" He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You want to talk about fair? My mother called me on the way over here. She asked if our engagement was still on. She said she didn't know how our families could ever be in the same room again. Your father told me he was ashamed. Ashamed, Chloe. That's what he said." Every word was another nail in my coffin. I had thought only of the immediate battle, of my own vindication. I hadn't thought about the political fallout, the families, the future, the Christmases, the birthdays, the weddings. All of it scorched earth. Liam stood up, jamming his hands in his pockets. He paced the small patch of lawn in front of the porch. "I need some air," he said, though we were already outside. It was a euphemism. "I need to get away from you." "Where are you going?" I asked, a new panic seizing me. I don't know, he said, not looking at me. I'm going to go for a drive. I need to think. He walked to his car without another word, got in, and started. The engine. I stood up, wanting to call out, to beg him to stay, to tell him we could fix this. But what could I say? I watched as the red taillights of his car disappeared down the street, leaving me alone again in the dark. This time, the silence felt permanent. The next morning, the sun rose with a kind of cheerful indifference that felt like a personal insult. I woke up on the couch, a stiff crick in my neck, the oppressive silence of the apartment amplifying the frantic thumping of my own heart. Liam hadn't come home. I knew he wouldn't. I had checked my phone a dozen times throughout the night, but the screen remained dark, a silent black mirror reflecting my own strained face. No calls, no texts, not from him, not from anyone. It seemed my excommunication was complete. I peeled myself off the sofa, feeling gritty and hollowed out. The silk dress was a wrinkled, pathetic reminder of the night before. It smelled of grass and champagne and disaster. I stripped it off, bundling it into a ball and stuffing it deep into the bottom of the hamper, as if I could discard the memory along with the fabric. A long, hot shower did little to wash away the feeling of grime that seemed to have settled deep under my skin. I was a pariah. I had made myself a pariah. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a small, steadying anchor in a sea of chaos. As the dark liquid dripped into the pot, my mind replayed the scene in the garden over and over again. Bella's triumphant smile, the collective gasp, my mother's furious face, my father's edict, Liam's broken expression, and Daniel's pathetic, guilty face. That was the one thing I clung to, the undeniable deer-in-the-headlights panic in his eyes. He hadn't even tried to mount a convincing defense. She's crazy, man. That was all he could muster. It was the defense of a guilty man. The doorbell rang, the sound so sharp and sudden it made me jump, sloshing hot coffee onto my hand. I hissed in pain, running my hand under cold. Water at the sink, my heart hammered against my ribs. Was it Liam? Had he come home to talk? To yell? I didn't care which, as long as he was here. I rushed to the door, my hair still damp, peering through the peephole. It wasn't Liam. It was my mother. She stood on the porch, her back ramrod straight, her face set like granite. She was dressed in a crisp linen suit, ready for battle. My stomach plummeted. This was not a visit of comfort or reconciliation. This was an official delegation from the enemy camp. I opened the door. She didn't wait for an invitation, just swept past me into the apartment, her expensive perfume instantly filling the small space. She surveyed the room, her eyes lingering on the single coffee mug, the rumpled throw blanket on the couch. Her lips thinned in disapproval. He didn't come home, she stated. It wasn't a question. I can't say I blame him. What do you want, Mom? I asked, my voice flat. I didn't have the energy for this. What do I want? She scoffed, turning to face me. Her eyes were cold, clinical. I want to understand what would possess my own daughter to behave like a feral animal. I want to know why you would deliberately, sadistically try to destroy your sister's life. I told the truth, I said, the words feeling thin and worn out already. Bella is having an affair. Oh, stop it, she snapped. Just stop it, Chloe. We spoke to Bella all morning. And to Mark, she explained everything. Explained what? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Did she explain the hotel receipt from the gilded cage? Did she explain Daniel's girlfriend's serpent earring being under the seat of a car she was driving? My mother actually waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. She told us, "You've been hoarding these little clues for weeks, twisting them into something ugly because you couldn't stand her happiness." The receipt was from a lunch Mark took her to months ago, a surprise. She must have dropped it. The earring? She said she gave a friend a ride. It probably belongs to her. These are the flimsy, pathetic threads you used to weave this monstrous lie. They had an answer for everything. Of course they did. Bella was a master storyteller, and my parents were her most devoted audience. They wanted to believe her. Believing her was easy. It meant their world could remain intact, their perfect family unit unsullied. Believing me meant confronting a rot they had no desire to see. And Daniel? I pressed, my voice shaking with frustration. What about the look on his face? He practically confessed with his eyes. Daniel was terrified. She shot back. Terrified of you, of your insane public accusation. The poor boy didn't know what to say. Bella said you've always had a strange fixation on him, that you've misinterpreted his kindness. A fixation on him? The lie was so audacious, so completely baseless that it left me breathless. They weren't just denying the truth. They were actively rewriting reality, painting me not just as jealous, but as delusional, as a stalker. That is a lie, I whispered, aghast. The only lie here is the one you told, my mother said, her voice dropping. She took a step closer. Your sister is pregnant, Chloe. She is carrying your father's and my grandchild. And she is under an incredible amount of stress because of you. Mark had to take her to the doctor this morning because she was cramping. She was so distraught. Do you understand what you've done? The threat was clear. If anything happened to that baby, it would be my fault. It was a checkmate. How could I fight that? So that's it. I asked, my voice hollow. You've already tried and convicted me. There's nothing I can say. Oh, there's something you can say, she replied, her tone shifting. This was the reason for her visit. The terms of surrender. You are going to call your sister. You are going to apologize for the lies you told. Then you are going to call Mark and your father and Liam's parents, and you will do the same. You will tell them you had a breakdown, that you were overwhelmed and jealous, and you said things you didn't mean. I stared at her, horrified. You want me to say I'm a liar. You want me to say I'm crazy. I want you to fix what you broke, she said coldly. This is your only way back into this family. Your only way. Bella is willing to forgive you if you show true remorse. Think about that. After what you did, she is still willing to be the bigger person. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it stole my breath. Bella, the magnanimous victim, willing to forgive me for exposing her betrayal. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and my mother was its willing messenger. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like the strongest thing I had ever said in my life. My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. What did you just say? No, I repeated, lifting my chin. I will not apologize for telling the truth. I will not call myself a liar to make Bella's life more convenient. And I will not say I'm crazy to make you all feel more comfortable. A dark, ugly flush crept up her neck. Then you are more of a fool than I thought. You are choosing this. You are choosing to be alone. I am not the one who is alone, I said, a strange new strength flowing through me. Bella is. She's in a marriage that's a lie. And she's dragging all of you into it with her. My mother stared at me for a long moment, her face a mask of cold fury, and deep beneath it, a flicker of something else. Was it disappointment, or was it fear? Fear that I might, just might, be right. But she extinguished it in an instant. I see, she said, her voice clipped. Well, when Liam comes to his senses and leaves you, when your friends have all abandoned you, don't you come crying to me? You've made your bed, Chloe, and you will lie in it. Alone. She turned on her heel and walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click that echoed the closing of a chapter in my life. I stood in the middle of my silent apartment, the scent of her perfume still hanging in the air. I was shaking, but underneath the fear, there was something else. A tiny hard kernel of something that felt like resolve. They thought they could break me. They thought they could bury me under the weight of their narrative. They had no idea who I was about to become. The days that followed were a study in isolation. My phone, once a constant source of connection, became a symbol of my solitude. The group chats went silent. The casual check-in texts from friends ceased. I was a social leper. The news of my spectacular implosion at the party had clearly traveled through the grapevine, and no one wanted to be near the blast radius. I imagined the conversations happening without me, the pitying head shakes, the whispered condemnations. Can you believe what Chloe did? I always knew there was something off about her. Liam remained a ghost. He came to the apartment once while I was out to pick up some clothes and his laptop. I knew because the closet was slightly disheveled and the indentation of his computer on the desk was gone. He left no note. He made no call. He was staying with his parents, I assumed, or maybe with a friend. Just not Daniel. The thought was a bitter pill. Even in his anger at me, he couldn't possibly be staying with Daniel. Or could he? If he truly believed I was a delusional liar, then Daniel was the victim just as Bella was. My fiancé could be comforting the very man who had betrayed him. The thought made me physically sick. I tried to work, sinking myself into blueprints for a downtown loft renovation, but the straight lines and cool colors on the screen couldn't hold my attention. My mind was a frantic hive of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only I had kept my mouth shut. If only I had talked to Liam first. If only Bella wasn't my sister, but she was. And that was the root of the entire problem. Our entire lives had been a quiet, undeclared war. She fought with grand, sweeping gestures, with charisma and drama. I fought by being perfect, by being good, by trying to win the love my parents seemed to give her so freely. And I had lost every single battle. The engagement party wasn't the start of the war. It was just the first time I had used live ammunition. A week after the party, I was sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by old photo albums. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. Evidence of a long-standing pattern that only I could see. Here was Bella, age 10, blowing out the candles on my 7th birthday cake as I cried in the background. Here she was, age 16, wearing the brown dress my mother had originally bought for me, claiming it fit her better. Here she was at my high school graduation, posing with my diploma, her arms slung around the principal. Page after page, it was the same story. Her in the spotlight, me in the shadows, a resentful blur at the edge of the frame. My mother was right about one thing. I was jealous, but it wasn't a simple, ugly envy of her possessions or her life. It was a deep, primal jealousy of her place in the world, of the ease with which she commanded love and attention, things I had to work so hard for. And she knew it. She had always known it, and she had used it against me, subtly, skillfully, for years. The pregnancy announcement wasn't just a thoughtless act. It was a calculated power play. It was her reminding me that no matter what I achieved, she could eclipse me with a single, effortless gesture. The buzz of my phone on the coffee table startled me. I looked at the screen, my heart leaping. Liam, but it wasn't him. The name on the screen was one I hadn't expected to see. Mark. My hand trembled as I answered it. Hello, Chloe. It's Mark. His voice was tired, strained. The confident, easygoing man I knew was gone, replaced by someone who sounded like he had aged a decade in a week. Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Hi. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of traffic, the faint wail of a siren. He was outside. I need to ask you something, he said finally. and I need you to tell me the absolute truth. No anger, no revenge, just the truth. Just the truth. Can you do that? Yes, I breathed. Of course. He took a shaky breath. The earring. You said you found an earring. What did it look like? My heart started to pound. This was it. This was the first crack in their fortress of lies. My mother had dismissed it. Bella had explained it away. But it had clearly been eating at Mark, a detail that didn't quite fit their neat and tidy story. It was gold, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, factual, a small hoop. And it had a little snake on it, a serpent, kind of coiled around the bottom. Silence. A heavy, loaded silence. I held my breath. A serpent, he repeated, his voice flat. Okay. Mark, I saw it, I said, my desperation rising. I'm not making this up. It was under the passenger seat of your car. The receipt from the gilded cage was with it. She told me about the receipt. He said dully. Said it was from months ago. A lunch. It wasn't for lunch, Mark, I said gently. The charge was for over $400. It was for a room. And room service for two on a Tuesday night. You were in Chicago. He didn't respond. I could almost feel his world tilting, the solid ground he had been standing on turning to quicksand. He had been clinging to Bella's story, wanting to believe it, but my details were too specific, too concrete. They were little seeds of doubt that had taken root. She's been different lately, he murmured, almost to himself. Secretive. With her phone. Working late, she said. But then her boss would call, asking where she was. He was connecting the dots. The little inconsistencies he had probably ignored, explained away, because the alternative was too monstrous to consider. I'm so sorry, Mark, I whispered. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with a pain that was awful to hear. Me, too. He cleared his throat. I have to go. And he hung up. I stared at my phone, my hand shaking. It wasn't a victory. It didn't feel good. I had just handed a good man the instrument of his own heartbreak. I had confirmed his worst fears, but it was necessary. It was the first time since that night that someone had listened to me, truly listened, and hadn't called me a liar. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't completely alone in my own truth. The fortress was beginning to crumble, and I had just handed Mark the hammer. Mark's call was a turning point. It shifted something in me, transforming my passive, wounded isolation into a quiet, focused resolve. Before I had been on the defensive, reacting to the attacks from my family, reeling from the silence of my finance. Now I felt a flicker of agency. The truth was a tangible thing, and I had just passed a piece of it to someone who might finally use it. But I couldn't rely on Mark. He was wounded, betrayed, and would be navigating his own emotional minefield. If I wanted to reclaim my life, my reputation, my relationship with Liam, I couldn't wait for others to fight my battles for. And the narrative they had woven was that I was an unstable, jealous hysteric. She's crazy. She's making it up. It was a classic, effective way to discredit a woman. The only way to combat a narrative like that wasn't with emotion or hysterics. It was with cold, hard, irrefutable proof. The kind of proof that couldn't be explained away by a masterful liar like my sister. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of hurt and anger, began to clear. The meticulous, detail-oriented part of my brain, the part that made me a good interior designer, took over. I needed a plan. I needed evidence. I had mentioned the receipt and the earring, and Bella had already created plausible-sounding lies to dismiss them. It was my word against hers, and in my family, her word was gospel. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. I started with what I knew. The affair had been going on for at least 6 months. The hotel was the Gilded Cage. The other party was Daniel. These were my starting parameters. My first move was tactical and felt slightly insane. I reactivated my old, barely used Facebook account. In the years Liam and I had been together, I had drifted away from social media, finding it all a bit performative and exhausting. Bella naturally thrived on it. Her profile was a carefully curated highlight reel of her perfect life. Perfect holidays, perfect dinners, perfect couple photos with Mark. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag couple goals. Hashtag love of my life. It was nauseating. I didn't look at her profile. I went to Daniel's. His was less curated, more of a casual log of his life. Check-ins at bars, photos from ball games, group shots with friends. Liam was in dozens of them. So was I. It was a digital chronicle of our lives, now tainted. I scrolled back 6 months, 7, 8. I was looking for patterns, for overlaps, for anything. And then I found it. Not on his page, but on the page of a mutual friend, and a tagged photo from a charity gala last spring. It was a big group picture. Liam and I were on one end, smiling. Mark was there, near the middle. And on the far other end, almost out of frame, were Bella and Daniel. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. It wasn't an innocent glance. There was an intensity to it, a shared secret that crackled in the space between them. It was the kind of look you could miss if you weren't looking for it. But now I was looking for it, and it was as loud as a gunshot. I saved. The photo, it was circumstantial, yes. But it was a start. It was corroboration of a timeline. My next step was a bigger risk. Our family had a shared phone plan. It was a relic from when Bella and I were teenagers, one of those. Things my father set up for convenience and never bothered to change. I was the primary account holder now because I was the most organized, the one who always paid the bills on time. The irony was not lost on me. For years, I had access to all the call and text logs, but I'd never had a reason to look. The thought of invading their privacy had always felt abhorrent. Now it felt like a necessary evil. My hands were shaking as I logged into the account online. I felt like a spy, a common criminal. My heart was pounding with a mixture of guilt and grim determination. This is what they've reduced me to, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. I navigated to the usage details, selected Bella's phone number, and set the date range for the past 6 months. The screen populated with pages and pages of data. Call logs, timestamps, durations, data usage, and text. Message records. It didn't show the content of the messages, of course, but it showed the numbers. Who was she texting and when? I pulled up Daniel's number from my own contacts and began to cross-reference. It didn't take long. The pattern was immediate and undeniable. Every single day, dozens of texts. Sometimes hundreds, late at night when Mark was asleep, early in the morning before he was awake. Long phone calls in the middle of the workday with timestamps that corresponded to the late meetings Mark had mentioned she was having. But here was the damning part, the part that made my breath catch in my throat. I looked at the logs for the date of the hotel receipt. The Tuesday Mark was in Chicago. At 10:17 p.m., a call from Bella's phone to Daniel's phone. Duration, 1 minute. Probably a come on up call. Then radio silence. For hours. And then a flurry of texts between them starting at 7 a.m. the next morning. This wasn't the flimsy thread my mother had accused me of weaving. This was a steel cable. I took screenshots. Dozens of them. I saved them to a new password-protected folder on my laptop. I labeled it Receipts. The adrenaline from the discovery left me feeling wired and strange. I was a detective in the ruins of my own life. Each piece of evidence was a small victory, but it was also another shovel of dirt on the grave of the family I thought I had. There was no coming back from this. Even if I was proven right, what would be left? A broken marriage, a shattered friendship, a family torn apart by betrayal and my role in exposing it. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face. The question Liam had asked me on the porch echoed in my mind. You wanted revenge, didn't you? I looked at the folder full of screenshots, the digital proof of my sister's secret life. Was this revenge? Or was it self-preservation? Maybe I realized with a startling clarity they were the same thing. They had tried to erase my reality, to overwrite my truth with their fiction. This wasn't about hurting them anymore. It was about proving that I exist, that what I know is real. My sanity was on the line, and I would burn their whole world down to get it back. The digital evidence was a solid foundation, but I knew it might not be enough. They could still try to spin it. We're just close friends. We talk a lot. Chloe is twisting our friendship into something sordid. I could hear Bella's smooth, reasonable explanations already. I needed something more. Something physical. Something that Daniel and Bella couldn't talk their way out of. My mind kept going back to the gilded cage. The hotel was the scene of the crime. It was a stylish, upscale boutique hotel in a renovated historic building downtown. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. It had a dark, moody bar on the ground floor, popular with business types and couples looking for an anonymous corner to whisper in. The thought of Bella and Daniel there, in that dim, intimate lighting, made my stomach clench with a fresh wave of disgust. What could I possibly find there weeks after the fact? It was a long shot, a desperate move, but I was running on desperation now. I got dressed, choosing a simple, anonymous outfit, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and a baseball cap. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want to run into anyone I knew. I felt like a fugitive, my own life the crime scene I was illicitly revisiting. Walking into the hotel lobby felt like crossing a boundary. The air was cool and smelled of leather and expensive floral arrangements. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. A wave of nausea washed over me. This place was a part of their secret. It felt contaminated. I walked straight to the elevators, trying to look like I belonged there, like I had a room upstairs. My heart was pounding. What was I even doing? This was insane. I could be arrested for trespassing. I didn't go up. Instead, I veered off to the side toward the hotel's business center. It was a small glass-walled room with a couple of computers and a printer. Empty, perfect. My real target was the lost and found. Hotels of this caliber were meticulous about it. The serpent earring was a ghost, a thing I had seen and touched but no longer possessed. They would have explained it away, but what if there was something else? Something they had forgotten. Something the hotel staff had found. I approached the front desk, my stomach in knots. A polite young man with impeccably styled hair smiled at me. "Can I help you, miss?" I had rehearsed my story in the car on the way over. It had to be simple, believable. "Hi," I started, trying to keep my voice casual. "This is a bit of a long shot, but I think I might have left something here a few weeks ago." A scarf. It was a common enough item to lose. Of course, he said, tapping on his computer. "Do you remember the date you were here?" Here was the tricky part. I couldn't give the exact date from the receipt. That would be too specific, too suspicious if they cross-referenced it and saw the room was booked under Mark's name, paid for with his card. But I knew Bella had used Mark's credit card. The last 4 digits had been on the receipt. I don't remember the exact date. I lied, feigning thoughtfulness. It was a Tuesday, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was here for a drink at the bar with a friend. I gave him my name, Chloe Miller. Not my sister's name. Not Mark's. A clean slate. He nodded, typing. "And can you describe the scarf?" "It was silk," I said. "Gray and blue, sort of a watercolor pattern." I had a scarf just like that at home. It was important to describe something real in case he asked for more detail. He disappeared into a back room. I stood at the counter, my hands gripping the marble edge so hard my knuckles were white. I felt every eye in the lobby on me. This was a fool's errand, a complete waste of time. He was going to come back empty-handed, and I would have to slink out of there in shame. He returned a minute later, holding a clear plastic bag. Inside was a scarf. A red wool scarf. Is this it? He asked. No, I said, my heart sinking. That's not it. I'm sorry, he said with practiced sympathy. That's the only scarf we have logged from that time period. He started to turn away. It was over. I had failed. As I turned to leave, a thought struck me. A last, desperate gamble. Wait, I said, turning back. You know what? My friend paid for the drinks that night. She might have booked a room, actually. I can't remember. Could you check under her name? Isabella Davies. Davies was my mother's maiden name. It was the name Bella sometimes used for reservations when she wanted a degree of anonymity, an old habit from her single days. The clerk's professional smile didn't waver. I can't give out information about our guests, miss. That's a violation of their privacy. No, of course not, I said quickly. I just meant for the lost and found. She's the one who lost something, not me. A bracelet. She's been going crazy looking for it. The lies were coming so easily now. It was terrifying. He hesitated, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He was about to refuse. I needed to push. Look, I said, leaning in and lowering my voice, creating a sense of manufactured intimacy. The bracelet was a gift from her husband, a big anniversary gift. If it's really lost, he's going to be furious. She's terrified to tell him. You'd be saving a marriage here. I gave him a small conspiratorial smile. It worked. The appeal to drama, to romance, to being a secret savior broke through his professional veneer. He sighed. Let me just look at the log, he said quietly. He went back into the room. This time, the wait felt like an eternity. I was convinced security was going to come out and escort me from the premises. When he came back, he wasn't holding anything. No bracelet under that name, he said. My shoulders slumped. It was over. I had nothing. But, he added, lowering his voice even further, there was an item logged from the room she was in. We tried to call the number on file, but it was incorrect. He slid a small sealed plastic bag across the counter. The maid found it on the bedside table. I looked down. My breath caught. Inside the bag was not a bracelet. It was a man's watch, a very distinctive watch. A sleek silver chronograph with a dark blue face. I knew that watch. I had helped Liam pick it out. It was the gift we had given Daniel for being the best man at our wedding. My blood ran cold. I felt lightheaded, the edges of my vision starting to go dark. This was it. This was the undeniable physical proof. The smoking gun, a man's watch, left on the bedside table of a hotel room that my sister had been in. And not just any man's watch, Daniel's watch. A gift from my fiancé. The symbolism was so grotesque, so deeply, profoundly sick, it was almost poetic. Is this it? The clerk asked, misinterpreting my shocked silence. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my hands shaking as I reached for the bag. Yes, I managed to choke out. Yes, that's it. Thank you. I turned and walked out of that hotel in a daze. I didn't remember the walk to my car. I didn't remember starting the engine. The next thing I knew, I was parked in my own driveway, clutching the plastic bag in my hand. The watch. Inside was cool and heavy. It was the weight of the truth. The weight of the bomb I was now holding. And I knew exactly where I was going to detonate it. For 3 days, the watch sat on my kitchen counter. I didn't put it away. I left it there, still sealed in its evidence bag, as a constant, tangible reminder of my new reality. It was a grim centerpiece. Every time I walked past it, I felt a jolt, a mixture of cold fury and an even colder sense of validation. I was not crazy. I was not a liar. The proof was right there, cool and metallic and irrefutable. During those 3 days, something else shifted. Liam called. It was a Tuesday evening, and the sound of his name flashing on my screen sent a shockwave through me. I let it ring 3 times, my hand hovering over the phone before I answered. I needed to sound calm. I needed to be in control. Hello? My voice was steadier than I expected. Chloe, he said. He sounded exhausted. Can we talk? I'm here, I said simply. He sighed. It was a long, weary sound. I spoke to Daniel. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stayed silent, waiting. I went to his apartment. I had to look him in the eye and ask him, Liam continued, his voice low. I asked him man to man if what you said was true. He paused. He denied it. Of course. Swore on his mother's grave. Said you were obsessed with him, that you'd been sending him weird signals for months, and when he didn't respond, you concocted this whole thing to ruin him. The lie was so familiar now, so rote. It was the official story, the one they had all agreed upon. But I could hear the doubt in Liam's voice. He was reciting the story, but he wasn't fully buying it. And what did you say? I asked quietly. I told him he was a liar, Liam said, and the tears I had been holding back for weeks finally sprang to my eyes. I told him that I've known him my whole life, and I've never seen him look as guilty as he did at that party. And I told him that while I don't understand why you did what you did, the way you did it, I know you, Chloe. You're a lot of things. You're meticulous, you're kind, you're sometimes a little too sensitive, but you're not a cruel person. And you're not a liar. I choked back a sob, pressing my palm against my mouth. He believed me. After all of it, after the public humiliation, the family pressure, the radio silence, he believed me. His story kept changing. Liam went on, a new hard edge to his voice. First, he said he'd barely spoken to Bella in a year. Then, when I said I knew that was a lie, he said they were just friends who confided in each other. He had an answer for everything, but none of them felt right. It was slippery, like trying to grab smoke. I have something, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Something real. What is it? What is it? Can you come over? I asked. I need to show you. There was a moment's hesitation. Things were still broken between us. Believing me and forgiving me were two very different things. Okay, he said finally. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he walked through the door, it was like a stranger and a husband all at once. We stood awkwardly in the entryway, the space between us charged with everything unsaid. He looked thinner, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. My heart ached for him, for the pain I had caused him, even in the service of the truth. Hi, he said. Hi, I replied. I didn't hug him. I didn't know if I was allowed to. Instead, I turned and led him to the kitchen. I pointed to the plastic bag on the counter. He looked at it, confused. What's that? What's that? Look closer, I said. He picked up the bag. He stared at the watch inside. His face went slack with recognition, then slowly hardened into a mask of cold fury. He didn't have to ask. He knew. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. From the lost and found at the Gilded Cage. I told him. The maid found it on the bedside table in the room Bella was in. The one she booked under a different name on the night Mark was out of town. The one she paid for with his credit card. I laid the facts out one by one, like bricks in a wall. Solid, unmovable. Liam put the bag down on the counter, his hand visibly shaking. He walked over to the sink, braced his hands on either side of it, and hung his head, his back to me. His shoulders were shaking. He was a silent, heartbroken statue. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, an accusation. It was real. It was a watch in a plastic bag on our kitchen counter, a watch he had bought for his best friend. All this time, he said, his voice muffled. All this time, he was lying to my face, both of them. I came up behind him, tentatively placing my hand on his back. He flinched at my touch, but he didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry, Liam," I whispered. "I'm so sorry you had to find out like this." He turned around, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Why, Chloe?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why at the party? Why did you have to do it like that?" It was the question that had been haunting us, the one we had to get past if we were ever going to survive this. I looked him straight in the eye, my own tears flowing freely now. "Because I was hurt," I said, my voice breaking. "And because I wanted her to hurt." She stood there, smiling, stealing the happiest moment of my life, and she did it on purpose. It was cruel. And all I could think about was the years and years of her cruelty, of her making me feel small. And I had this horrible, ugly truth in my head, and I wanted to throw it at her. I wanted to see her perfect, smiling face fall apart. It was a terrible thing to do. It was vengeful, and it was selfish, and I wounded you, and Mark, and everyone else in the process. And I'm so, so sorry for that part, for the way I did it, but I am not sorry for telling the truth. He searched my face, and for the first time, I felt like he truly saw me. Not as the creator of a mess, but as someone who had been pushed past her breaking point. He saw the years of quiet resentment, the final unbearable provocation. He didn't condone it, but I think in that moment he finally understood it. He pulled me into his arms, and I collapsed against him, sobbing. He held me tightly, his hand stroking my hair. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a magic wand that could undo the damage, but it was a start. We were on the same side again, the two of us against the ruins. "Okay," he whispered into my hair. "Okay, so what do we do now?" We had the proof, the watch, the phone logs, the circumstantial but emotionally powerful photograph. We had an arsenal. The question, as Liam had asked, was what to do with it. My first instinct, my basest, most vengeful instinct, was to go public. To post it all on Facebook, tag everyone, and let the world see the unvarnished, ugly truth. I wanted to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. I wanted to burn their carefully constructed images to the ground. I fantasized about it for a full day, imagining Bella's phone blowing up, the horrified comments, the swift and brutal social justice. But Liam, in his quiet, steady way, was my voice of reason. "And then what?" he asked as we sat at the kitchen table, the watch between us like a loaded gun. "You prove your point, yes. But you do it in the messiest, most public way possible. You stoop to their level. You become the drama. Is that who you want to be?" He was right. My actions at the party had been born of impulse and rage. My next move had to be deliberate. It had to be about restoring the truth, not just about inflicting pain. This wasn't just about my vindication anymore. It was about Mark. He deserved to know the full, unvarnished truth in a way that respected his own dignity, not through a public shaming. It was also about my parents. As much as they had hurt me, they were victims in this too, deceived by their favored daughter. "So, what do you suggest?" I asked, looking at his tired but resolute face. "We don't do this in the court of public opinion," he said. "We do it in the court of our family. A direct confrontation, no audience, no spectators. Just the people who matter, your parents, Mark, and the two of them." A cold dread washed over me. The thought of being in the same room with all of them, The air thick with tension and accusation was terrifying. "They'll just lie again," I said. "They'll deny everything. My parents will take her side. It will be the party all over again, just in a living room." "No, it won't," Liam said, his voice firm. He tapped the plastic bag containing the watch. "Because this time, we have this. And we don't lead with it. We let them lie. We let them dig their own graves. And when they are done, when they have committed to their story in front of everyone, then you show them this." It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy, a trap, a perfectly laid snare of their own making. It gave them every opportunity to come clean, and when they inevitably didn't, their lies would be exposed in the most undeniable way possible. The call was made by my father. It seemed Mark had not been idle. His conversation with me had planted a seed, and it had been growing. He had started asking questions, checking credit card statements, noting inconsistencies in Bella's stories. He had confronted her, and she, cornered, had doubled down on her lies, accusing him of believing her crazy, jealous sister over his own wife. The situation had become untenable. A family meeting was necessary, a summit to clear the air, and in my parents' minds, to force me and Mark to see reason and apologize to the pregnant, distraught Bella. They wanted to have it at my parents' house, the scene of my original crime. I refused. "No," I told my father on the phone, Liam's hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. "I will not go back there. If you want to have this conversation, it will be on neutral ground. My apartment." There was a long-suffering sigh on the other end. "Chloe, don't be difficult. It's the apartment. Or it's nowhere," I said, my voice unwavering. "You can come here and we can talk like adults." "That's the offer." He relented. They would come, Sunday at noon. My mother, my father, Mark, and Bella. Liam would be there with me. Daniel was not invited. This was a family matter. His reckoning would come later. The days leading up to the meeting were the longest of my life. The apartment, once my sanctuary, started to feel like a pressure cooker. Liam and I moved around each other in a state of quiet, nervous tension. We cleaned obsessively, as if a spotless environment could somehow guarantee a clean outcome. I rehearsed what I would say, what I would do. Liam played the devil's advocate, throwing Bella's potential arguments at me so I could be prepared. "She say you planted it. How could I have planted it?" I reply, my voice shaking slightly. "The hotel logged it in weeks ago. They have records." They tried to call the number on file, which was Mark's, but Bella had given them one digit off. A classic Bella move. Plausible deniability. "She say Daniel lost it somewhere else and you got your hands on it." And how would I know it was at that specific hotel? How would I know to ask for it? How would I know which room she was in? The logic was sound. The evidence was airtight. But my fear wasn't about the logic. It was about the emotion. I was about to look my sister in the eye and dismantle her life. I was about to watch my parents' image of their perfect daughter crumble into dust. There is no victory in this. There is only a grim, painful necessity. On Sunday morning, I woke up with my stomach in a tight, painful knot. I couldn't eat. I drank a cup of tea, my hands trembling. Liam held my hand across the table. "We can still call this off," he said softly. "We don't have to do this." I looked at him, at his tired, loving face. He was willing to live in the wreckage with me, to let the lies stand if it meant protecting me from this confrontation. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to see it through. For him, for me, for the truth that we both deserved. "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "We have to do this. I have to do this." I stood up and went to the kitchen counter. I took the watch out of its plastic bag. The cool, heavy metal felt solid in my palm. I walked over to the bookshelf in the living room and placed it behind a stack of art books, out of sight but within easy reach. The stage was set. All we had to do now was wait for the actors to arrive. They arrived precisely at noon, as if on a timer. I saw them from the window, pulling up in my father's car. Mark had driven himself and was parking a few spaces down. He looked grim. Bella got out of the car with my parents, her hand placed protectively on her stomach. Even from 2 stories up, I could see she was already in character, the fragile, aggrieved victim. Liam stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, a silent, solid presence. "Ready?" he whispered. "No," I whispered back, "but let's do it anyway." The knock on the door was sharp and patient. My mother's knock. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and walked to the door. Liam followed close behind. I opened it. My parents stood there, their faces grim. Bella was slightly behind them, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She had been crying, or at least performing the act of crying. She refused to look at me, staring at a point somewhere over my shoulder. Mark walked up the path and stood slightly apart from them, his expression unreadable. "Come in," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I stepped back, holding the door open. They filed into my apartment, my small, neutral territory, and it felt immediately crowded, suffocating. My mother surveyed the room with a critical eye. My father stood stiffly by the door, his arms crossed. Bella immediately went to the sofa and sank into it, letting out a small, pained sigh. Mark remained standing, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. Liam closed the door, the soft click sealing us in. The 5 of us, and all the ugly secrets that were with us in the room. My father cleared his throat, taking charge as he always did. "All right," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a CEO chairing a hostile board meeting. "We are all here to put an end to this ugliness. Chloe, your sister is here. She is willing to listen to your apology." I glanced at Bella. Her eyes were closed, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her that. "I don't think that's why we're here, Dad," I said calmly. Liam moved to stand beside me, a united front. My mother scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Chloe. Can you not, for once, just put your pride aside? Your sister's health is at risk. The stress you have put her under is unconscionable. The stress I've put her under." I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I looked directly at Bella. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting mine for a brief, hateful second before looking away. "Or the stress of lying to your husband, to your family, every single day for months. Us. There she goes again," my mother exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "We are not here to listen to these fantasies." "Mark," I said, turning my attention to him. His head came up, his eyes meeting mine. They were filled with a profound, weary sadness. "Did you believe her when she told you that you were being paranoid? When she said you were twisting her friendship with Daniel into something ugly?" Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced at Bella, who was now staring at him, her expression a mixture of pleading and warning. He took a breath. "I wanted to," he said, his voice raspy. "God, I wanted to believe her." "But you don't," I pressed gently. He shook his head slowly, a single devastating motion. "No." Bella let out a strangled gasp. "Mark, how can you say that? How can you take her side?" "This isn't about sides, Bella." Mark snapped, his voice finally cracking with the strain of the past few weeks. "This is about the truth. The credit card statements you've been hiding. The late nights you can't explain. The constant texting with him." I saw the phone bill, Bella. Hundreds of texts a day. What kind of friendship is that? My parents looked stunned, their gazes shifting from Mark to Bella. They had come here expecting a simple apology from me. They were not prepared for Mark to be corroborating my story. The narrative was already starting to unravel. He was my friend, Bella cried, her voice rising hysterically. My confidant. You were so distant, so wrapped up in work. I needed someone to talk to, and Chloe, with her sick, twisted mind, is turning it into some sordid affair. She's poisoning. You against me. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She has no proof, none. It's just her word against mine. And you all know what she's like. You know how jealous she's always been. It was her final desperate gambit to fall back on the old familiar story. Chloe is jealous. Chloe is crazy. She looked at my parents, her eyes begging them to believe her, to choose her one last time. My father took a step forward, his face a mask of confusion and anger. Chloe, if you have no proof, he started, his voice a low warning. This was it, the moment Liam and I had planned for. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat, letting her lies echo in the small room. I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she had cornered me. I turned slowly and walked to the bookshelf. I reached behind the stack of books. Every eye in the room followed my movement. I picked up the watch. I turned back around, holding it in my open palm so the light from the window glinted off the silver band and the dark blue face. You're right, Bella, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. I don't have any proof. Except for this. I held it out. There was a collective intake of breath. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared, speechless. Mark's face went white. He recognized it instantly. But the most telling reaction was Bella's. The color drained from her face. The mask of the hysterical victim dissolved, replaced by the stark, ugly face of pure, unadulterated panic. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the watch, her mouth slightly agape. She looked like a cornered animal. There was no explanation. For this, no plausible lie, no story she could spin. I took a step toward her, still holding out the watch. Do you recognize this, Bella? You should. The maid at the Gilded Cage found it on the bedside table after you and Daniel checked out. It's a nice watch. Liam and I gave it to him as a gift for being the best man at our wedding. The words fell into the silence, each one a hammer blow, demolishing the foundation of her lies, of her life. Bella didn't say a word. She just stared at the watch, her whole body trembling. The truth was finally in the room, undeniable and brutal. And it had destroyed her. The silence that followed the revelation of the watch was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a crushing, absolute void, filled with the wreckage of everything that had just been destroyed. My parents stood frozen, their faces a tableau of shock and dawning horror. All the anger they had directed at me had evaporated, replaced by a terrible, slow-dawning understanding. They were looking at Bella, their perfect, wrong daughter, as if for the very first time. And they were finally seeing the truth. Mark was the one who broke the silence. He let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob, a sound of pure, bitter heartbreak. He walked over to the sofa where Bella was sitting, catatonic, and he looked down at her, his face a ruin. All this time, he whispered, his voice cracking, all the lies. You let me defend you. You let me fight with my friends, with my family. You let me look like a fool. Bella flinched, pulling her knees up to her chest as if to ward off a physical blow. She finally looked up at him, her face stripped bare of all its artifice. There were no more tears, no more hysterics. Just the raw, ugly face of guilt. Mark. She began, her voice a pathetic croak. I was going to tell you. When? He shot back, his voice rising in anguish. When, Bella? After the baby was born? Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to let me raise another man's child? The question hung in the air, sickening and awful. The unspoken horror that had been lurking beneath the surface was now out in the open. At the mention of the baby, my mother let out a small, wounded cry. She took a staggering step forward. "Isabella," she whispered, the name a plea. "The baby, is it Mark's?" Bella buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with real, racking sobs. Not the performative tears from before, but the ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of someone whose world has just ended. Her silence was the answer. It was the final, most devastating confession. My father, who had been a pillar of stoic anger, seemed to deflate. He sank into a nearby armchair, his face pale, his eyes vacant. He looked like a man who had been told his entire life's investment was worthless. The perfect family he had built, the daughter he had adored and defended, it was all a lie. He looked at me across the room, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I had never expected to see. Shame. He was ashamed of his blindness, of his willingness to believe the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. He was ashamed of what he had done to me. Liam, who had been a silent pillar of support beside me, put his arm around my waist, holding me steady. I was shaking, not with triumph, but with the aftershock of the explosion I had triggered. There was no joy in this. There was no satisfaction in seeing my family implode. There was only a profound, hollow sadness. Mark stood there for a long moment, looking down at his weeping wife. Then, with a strange, chilling calm, he took off his wedding ring. He placed it gently on the coffee table in front of her, next to a stack of my interior design magazines. The small metallic sound was like a gavel falling. A final judgment. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He turned, without another glance at anyone, and walked out of the apartment. The closing of the door was soft, final. A life had just ended. A marriage had been executed. The room was left with the four of us, the broken pieces of our family. My mother was kneeling by the sofa, trying to comfort Bella, who was inconsolable. My father was staring into space, lost in his own private ruin. Liam and I stood apart, observers of the wreckage we had uncovered. After a few minutes of Bella's raw sobs, my father finally stood up. He looked old, defeated. He walked over to me, stopping a few feet away. "Chloe," he said, his voice heavy. He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry." The words wouldn't come. But I saw them in his eyes. I saw the regret, the apology he was incapable of speaking. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just acknowledgement. He turned and helped my mother get Bella to her feet. She was a dead weight, leaning heavily on them. They guided her out of the apartment like she was an invalid, her face buried in my mother's shoulder. My mother wouldn't look at me. She couldn't. To look at me would be to acknowledge my role as the truth teller, and her role as the fool, and her pride would never allow that. The door closed behind them, and then there was silence. A real, profound silence, not the tense, waiting silence from before. It was the silence of an empty battlefield after the war is over. Liam's arms wrapped around me from behind, and I leaned back against his chest, my body finally succumbing to the exhaustion. The adrenaline, the anger, the fear, it all drained out of me, leaving me feeling hollow and fragile. I looked at the watch, still sitting on the bookshelf. Such a small object to cause so much destruction. "It's over," Liam whispered into my hair. I shook my head, tears finally streaming down my face. "No," I whispered. "It's just beginning." The weeks that followed were quiet, eerily so. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was flattened and unrecognizable. There were no more angry phone calls, no more family summits. Just a vast echoing silence from my parents and sister. I heard through a cousin that Mark had filed for divorce the day after the confrontation. He had moved out. Bella was staying with my parents, cocooned in their grief and shame. The pregnancy, the thing she had used as a weapon to steal my spotlight, had become the symbol of her ruin. Daniel evaporated from our lives. He sent Liam a single, rambling email full of pathetic excuses and pleas for forgiveness. Liam deleted it without a reply. Some betrayals, we learned, are so profound they don't warrant a response. They simply require an amputation. The friendship was severed cleanly and completely. Our wedding party would need a new best man, if we even still wanted a wedding party. Everything was different now. Liam and I moved through the world differently. Our relationship, which had been tested by fire, had reformed into something stronger, quieter, more resilient. The easy, uncomplicated joy of our early days was gone, replaced by a sober understanding of what it meant to truly stand by someone. We talked, really talked, about everything. My lifelong rivalry with Bella, his blind spot. For Daniel, my impulsive cruelty at the party. His pained withdrawal afterward. We laid all the broken pieces on the table and slowly, carefully, began to put ourselves back together. We decided to postpone the wedding. The thought of walking down an aisle, of celebrating a union in the shadow of so much destruction, felt wrong. "I'm not marrying you to have a party," Liam said to me one evening, as we sat on the porch of the apartment that had become our fortress. "I'm marrying you to have a life with you. The party can wait. Let's just have a life first." I had never loved him more than in that moment. My own transformation was the most profound. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving my family's approval, that had bent and shaped itself to try and earn their love, had died in that living room. In its place was a quiet, unshakable sense of self. I was no longer defined by my relationship to Bella. I was not. Bella's little sister. I was Chloe, a woman who had told an unbearable truth and had survived the fallout. There was a strength in that, a freedom I had never known. I no longer felt the need to be perfect or to please everyone. I was content to simply be real. My work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my designs, finding a sense of control and creation in shaping spaces. I took on new clients, bigger projects. My confidence grew. I was good at what I did. I didn't need a cheering section to know my own worth. Months passed. The seasons changed. Autumn bled into a cold, crisp winter. One afternoon, a package arrived for me. A small, square box with no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, framed photograph. It was of me and Bella when we were children. We were maybe 5 and 8 years old, sitting on a swing set, our heads close together, laughing. Before the rivalry, before the jealousy, before life had carved out our separate, warring identities. For a moment, we were just sisters. Tucked behind the photo was a note written in my father's familiar, slanted handwriting. It was short, just 3 words. She lost it. I knew what it meant. The baby. The stress, the heartbreak, the shame, it had all taken its toll. Bella was no longer pregnant. A wave of something complex and unsettling washed over me. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a deep, profound wave of sorrow. Sorrow for the innocent life that had been lost in the crossfire of our war. Sorrow for my sister, who had lost everything, her husband, her child, her home, her honor. And sorrow for myself, for the fact that my path to freedom had to be paved with so much of her ruin. Liam came home to find me sitting with the note in my hand, tears silently streaming down my face. He read it, and then he simply held me. There was nothing to say. Some griefs are too complicated for words. That note, I realized, was my father's final apology. It was his way of acknowledging the full cost of Bella's lies and his own blindness. It was the end of the story. We never did have that big wedding. A year after the disastrous engagement party, Liam and I flew to the coast and got married on a cliffside overlooking the ocean with only two strangers as our witnesses. It was perfect. Quiet, elegant, and ours. Entirely, completely ours. My relationship with my parents is cordial, distant. We see them on holidays. The conversations are strained, full of unspoken things. There's love there, I think, but it is a damaged, scarred love. I don't know if it will ever fully heal. I have not seen or spoken to Bella since the day she left my apartment. I don't know if I ever will. Some chasms are too wide to cross. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about reconciliation. It's about letting go. It's about accepting what happened and choosing to walk forward without the weight of the past on your back. I am no longer the girl in the shadows, reflecting someone else's light. I am my own person, standing in my own sun. And, for the first time in my life, that is more than enough.